All right, let's dive in. UFOs. But maybe not the way you're used to hearing about them.
Yeah, we're going to be taking a bit more of a critical approach, I guess you could say.
Right, skeptical lens. That's what we're calling it, at least.
Yeah.
We're going to be digging into this book by Robert Sheaffer called The UFO Verdict.
Now, Schieffer's a pretty prominent UFO skeptic,
Which means,
which means he really dives deep into the claims and the evidence. He's not just taking things at face value, he's actually investigating these cases.
so he's not just like, nope, don't believe it. He's actually out there trying to figure out what's what.
Exactly.
And to give you an idea of just how seriously we're taking this, James Oberg, he's a NASA space specialist, by the way, and a UFO columnist for Omni magazine. He wrote the intro to Schieffer's book.
And he's not just praising the book, he's praising Schieffer's meticulous research.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who really knows his stuff.
Yeah, we're not messing around here. And that research really shows when Sheaffer looks into some of the more well-known UFO cases.
Yeah, like take President Jimmy Carter's UFO sighting. It happened back in the 70s, I think. Big deal.
Right, the president sees a UFO. Gotta be aliens, right?
Well, Schieffer found another witness who was with Carter that day.
Oh, really? So two people saw the same thing?
Yeah, and guess what they thought it was?
I don't know, a flying saucer.
A weather balloon. They thought it was just a plain old weather balloon.
So even with multiple witnesses, the explanation can still be pretty mundane.
Shows you how our perceptions can be shaped by what we expect to see, right?
Totally. And when it comes to UFOs, everyone has expectations.
Yeah, everyone has an opinion.
That's one thing I've always found fascinating about this whole UFO thing, that the people, the groups, the whole subculture.
Oh, it's a world unto itself.
You've got your APRO, your NCAP, your MUFO, your CUFOS.
Each with their own beliefs, their own methods.
And their own personalities, right?
Oh, absolutely. Some of these folks are real characters, let me tell you.
I bet. And they don't always get along either, do they?
Oh, no. There's rivalry, infighting, disagreements over cases. It's almost like a soap opera sometimes.
So it's not just about aliens and spaceships, it's about the people involved, too. The drama.
Oh, yeah, tons of drama.
A great example of that is the Travis Walton abduction case. You familiar with that one?
Oh, yeah, classic case. Logging crew in Arizona, right? Walton claims he's abducted by aliens.
Right. And of course, it becomes this huge controversy.
Oh, yeah, some groups, like
Yeah.
APRO, were all in on this being a genuine abduction, proof of alien contact.
But other groups, like Ground Saucer Watch GSW, for sure they weren't so sure.
They pointed out inconsistencies in the story, alleged cover-ups.
So you've got these groups battling it out, accusing each other of hiding evidence, distorting the truth.
It gets really heated, and of course, in the middle of it all, you have Walton sticking to his story.
It's like watching a reality TV show unfold, except the stakes are way higher.
That's a great way to put it, and it all boils down to one question. What's the evidence?
Right. And one of the most common types of evidence people present when it comes to UFOs is photographs, right?
Oh, absolutely. Photos and videos. Everyone wants that smoking gun image.
But how reliable are those images? I mean, anyone can Photoshop something these days.
That's true, and that's where Schieffer's own experience as a photographer comes in handy.
Oh, he's a photographer too.
Yeah, and he actually created a hoax UFO photo.
Really? To prove a point.
Exactly. He wanted to show how easy it is to fake these things.
What did he use? Like a Frisbee or something?
A banana split.
Wait, a banana split.
He used a banana split as his UFO.
That's hilarious and kind of brilliant.
The point is, you can't just take a photo at face value.
Mm.
You need to look for signs of manipulation, consider the source, understand the context.
Right. And even then, it can be tough to tell what's real and what's not.
Absolutely. There are some famous cases where even experts can't agree. Like the Heflin photos, for instance.
What were those?
They were taken by a California highway patrolman back in the 60s.
And they were considered some of the best UFO photos ever taken, right?
As some people, yeah. But here's the thing. The original negatives disappeared.
Disappeared. What happened?
Allegedly, they were taken by men claiming to be from NORAD. Very mysterious.
Whoa. Okay, so right away, we've got intrigue.
And when GSW analyzed the available copies of the photos, they found some inconsistencies.
Inconsistencies? Like what?
Things like the focus being off, a possible thread supporting the UFO. It looked like it could have been a hoax.
So even photos that are considered classics can be questionable.
Absolutely. And then you have the Trent photos, which are still considered by some to be the best UFO pictures out there.
But even with those, there's debate, right?
Oh, yeah. Some people think they've been tampered with, while others argue they're genuine. It's
Yep.
a classic case of you see what you want to see.
It's almost like the ambiguity is part of the allure. It keeps people guessing, keeps the mystery alive.
You know, it makes you think about other times in history when People believed in things we now consider, well, fantastical, like witchcraft or fairies.
Yeah, it's interesting how those beliefs were taken seriously back then.
And Sheaffer actually makes some really compelling connections between those historical beliefs and modern ufology. Yeah. Think about it. In the 17th century, you had some of the most brilliant minds seriously investigating witchcraft.
Really, like trying to prove it scientifically.
Yeah. They gather eyewitness accounts of people turning into animals, women giving birth to strange creatures.
It's like the UFO sightings of their time, people seeing things they couldn't explain and attributing it to the supernatural.
Exactly. And just like with UFOs, the evidence was often ambiguous, open to interpretation. And it wasn't just ordinary folks who got caught up in these kinds of beliefs either.
Right. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, got sucked into this.
Yeah, can you believe it? The guy who practically invented the detective novel?
Yeah. The master of logic and deduction.
Believed in fairies. He was fascinated by the supernatural.
And he got really into those Cottingley fairy photographs.
Those photos were huge back then.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing those as a kid. They looked so real. Those little fairies dancing in the garden.
Well, it turned out they were fakes. Clearly staged with cardboard cutouts and some trick photography.
Oh, man. Talk about a shattered illusion. But it just goes to show, even the smartest people can fall for a good hoax.
It's a reminder that we all have our biases, and sometimes we see what we want to see.
Even Sherlock Holmes himself could be fooled.
It seems like the allure of the unknown can really cloud our judgment.
And speaking of the unknown, how can we forget about the men in black?
Ah, yes. The MIBs.
Mysterious figures in black suits who supposedly silence UFO witnesses.
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
It's like something out of a movie.
It is. Tell me more. What's the deal with these guys?
Well, one of the most famous cases is the Bender mystery.
Who's Bender?
Albert Bender, a UFO researcher who suddenly went silent after claiming to have uncovered some huge truth about UFOs.
What happened to him?
He claimed that 3 men in black visited him and told him to keep quiet.
Whoa. Seriously? They threatened him.
That's what he said. He never revealed exactly what they told him, but he hinted at some wild theories.
So we don't know what the big secret was?
Nope, it's a mystery.
Ah, come on. That's so frustrating. So who are these men in black? Government agents? Aliens in disguise?
Nobody knows for sure. That's what makes it so creepy.
I know. It's like, are we just scratching the surface here? Is there something bigger going on that we're not aware of?
It definitely makes you wonder.
It's like UFOs are almost playing a game with us. They show up, disappear, leave little bits of evidence, but never enough to fully prove anything.
You know, Sheaffer talks about this idea of a jealous phenomenon.
Jealous phenomenon? What's that?
It's this idea that UFOs seem to appear most often where they're hardest to verify.
So they avoid leaving behind clear evidence.
Yeah, almost like they're intentionally keeping us guessing.
Like they want us to chase after them, but they'll always stay one step ahead.
It's a really interesting concept.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you think, what's their goal? Why all this secrecy?
Right. What are they trying to achieve? Are they just messing with us?
Well, let's think about it for a second. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that UFOs are real. What are some possible reasons they might be here?
Okay, I'm game. Let's speculate.
One possibility is that they're just observing us.
Observing us, like we're some kind of science experiment.
Maybe. Like scientists studying a new species.
So they're watching us from afar, trying to understand how we behave.
It's possible. Maybe they're just curious about us or our planet.
It's a little creepy to think that we might be under surveillance, but I guess it's not entirely out there.
I mean, we do the same thing with animals, right? We observe them in their natural habitats.
That's true. But it's different when it's us being observed by some advanced intelligence.
It definitely raises some big questions about our place in the universe.
Okay, so maybe they're here to observe us. What else?
Another possibility, and this is venturing into sci-fi territory a bit, is that they're here for resources.
Resources. Like what? Oil? Gold?
Yeah. Maybe something we haven't even discovered yet. Something unique to Earth.
So they're mining our planet for some alien superfuel or something. That's kind of scary.
It's a possibility, though it seems unlikely that they'd travel all this way just for that.
Yeah, space is a big place. You'd think they could find what they need closer to home.
Okay, so we've got observation and resource gathering. What other reasons could there be?
This is where my imagination starts to run wild.
Well, how about this? What if they're not here to observe or take anything but to help us?
Help us? You mean like benevolent aliens?
Maybe. What if they're here to guide us, to subtly influence our development?
Like cosmic guardians looking out for us.
It's an interesting idea, isn't it?
It is. But if they're so advanced and they care about us, why not just make open contact?
That's a good question. Maybe they have some kind of prime directive that prevents them from interfering too much.
Or maybe they think we're not ready for that kind of knowledge.
It's possible. Or maybe, and this is a bit out there, they're conducting some kind of long-term experiment.
An experiment. On us.
Maybe they're observing how we react to these strange encounters, how we try to make sense of the unknown.
That's a bit unsettling, but I guess it's not totally implausible.
It's all speculation at this point. We simply don't have enough information to say for sure.
That's true, but it's fun to think about. And it all comes back to the central question, what is the evidence?
Right. We can speculate all day long, but without solid evidence, it's all just guesswork.
So how do we approach this subject objectively? How do we sort through all the noise and figure out what's real and what's not?
That's where the skeptical lens becomes so important.
It's not about dismissing everything as a hoax, is it?
No, not at all. It's about demanding strong evidence before accepting extraordinary claims.
So we can be open to the possibility of the unknown, but we also need to be critical of the evidence.
Exactly. We need to approach this with both curiosity and a discerning eye.
Like a detective investigating a case, right?
Exactly. We need to gather the facts, analyze the evidence, and try to build a plausible narrative.
But sometimes the hardest part is knowing which evidence to trust.
That's where critical thinking skills come in.
So even if a photo of a UFO looks convincing, we need to ask, where did this photo come from? Who took it? Could it have been altered?
Those are all great questions to ask.
And the same goes for eyewitness testimony, right?
Absolutely. We need to consider the witness's credibility, their state of mind at the time, and the possibility of misinterpretation.
Because sometimes our memories can be unreliable, especially when it comes to something as strange and unexpected as a UFO sighting.
Our brains can play tricks on us. We see what we expect to see or what we want to see.
It's like those optical illusions that make you see things that aren't really there.
Exactly. Our perceptions are not always accurate, and that's something to keep in mind when evaluating UFO reports.
So it's not just about the evidence itself, but also about the context, the source, and the potential for human error.
It's about taking a holistic view, considering all the factors at play.
So, if we're going to approach the UFO phenomenon with a skeptical lens, where do we start? What are the key principles we need to keep in mind?
I think one of the most important principles is the idea of the null hypothesis.
Okay, remind me what that is again?
Basically, it means that we should assume the most mundane explanation for a phenomenon until proven otherwise.
So we don't automatically jump to the conclusion that it's aliens.
Exactly. We start with the simplest explanation and only move on to more complex ones if the evidence requires it.
So if someone sees a strange light in the sky, we should first consider things like airplanes, satellites, or weather balloons before jumping to the conclusion that it's an alien spacecraft.
Right. It's about being grounded in reality and not letting our imaginations run wild.
It's like Occam's razor, right? The
Yeah.
simplest explanation is usually the best.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And it helps us avoid bias and wishful thinking.
Okay, so we start with the null hypothesis. What else?
Another important concept is falsifiability.
Falsifiability. That sounds complicated.
It's not really. It basically means that a scientific hypothesis should be testable. There should be a way to potentially prove it wrong.
So if someone claims that a UFO sighting was caused by aliens, what kind of evidence could we look for to disprove that claim?
We'd look for alternative explanations that fit the observed data. Could it have been a drone, a weather phenomenon, a reflection of light? Was the witness's perception reliable?
So we're looking for more plausible explanations that don't involve extraterrestrials.
Exactly. And if we can find a more down-to-earth explanation that fits the facts, it weakens the alien hypothesis.
It's like a process of elimination, right? We rule out the most likely explanations first, and if nothing else fits, then we can start to consider more extraordinary possibilities.
That's a good analogy.
But it sounds like investigating UFOs from a skeptical perspective can be tricky.
It can be, because the evidence is often so ambiguous and open to interpretation.
We're dealing with eyewitness accounts, blurry photos, radar blips. It's not always easy to separate fact from fiction.
That's why it's so important to evaluate the sources of information, to consider the biases of those involved, and to be wary of sensationalized accounts.
Because sometimes people exaggerate or even make things up entirely.
Right. Unfortunately, that does happen. And there are people who exploit the public's fascination with UFOs for their own gain.
So we need to be discerning consumers of information. We can't just believe everything we read or hear.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to something as extraordinary as UFOs.
And even when a piece of evidence seems compelling, we need to remember that human perception is fallible.
Right. Our memories can be influenced by our expectations, our beliefs, even our emotions.
We might see what we want to see or remember things differently than they actually happened.
That's why it's so important to have multiple sources of information, to corroborate accounts, and to look for inconsistencies.
So it's not just about the evidence itself, but also about the context, the source, and the potential for human error.
It's about taking a holistic view, considering all the factors at play.
So how do we approach this whole UFO thing with a healthy balance of skepticism and open-mindedness?
I think the key is to embrace curiosity, but temper it with critical thinking.
So be open to the possibility that there might be something out there, but don't just blindly accept everything you hear.
Exactly.
Okay.
Demand evidence, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
And remember that the absence of a definitive explanation doesn't automatically prove that something extraordinary is happening.
Right. Sometimes the most intellectually honest answer is, we don't know yet.
And that's okay, right?
It is. The pursuit of knowledge is a journey, not a destination.
That's a great way to put it. We're all still learning and exploring, and there's always more to discover.
The universe is a vast and mysterious place, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
Well said. All right, so we've talked about the believers. We've looked at the evidence, or at least what some people call evidence.
Right. We've entertained some pretty wild theories, too.
Yeah, some of that stuff was out there, but now I think it's time to bring it back down to earth a little.
Ground ourselves, so to speak.
Exactly. Let's put those skeptical lenses back on and see what we can make of all this.
Okay, so one of the most important principles when it comes to skeptical thinking, especially when we're talking about something as, well, extraordinary as UFOs, is the null hypothesis.
The null hypothesis. Remind me what that is again.
Basically, it means that we should assume the most mundane explanation for something until proven otherwise.
So we don't just jump to the conclusion that it's aliens.
Exactly. We start with the simplest explanation and only consider more complex ones if the evidence absolutely demands it.
So if someone sees a weird light in the sky, our first thought shouldn't be spaceship.
Right. We should think about things like airplanes, weather balloons, satellites, things like that.
Things that have, actually been proven to exist.
Exactly. It's about being grounded in reality, not letting our imaginations run wild.
Keeps us honest, I guess you could say.
And it helps us avoid bias. We're not letting our preconceived notions color our judgment.
Okay, I'm with you so far. Null hypothesis. Start with the simplest explanation.
Now, another important concept is falsifiability.
Falsifiability. Okay, that one sounds a little more, technical.
It's not that complicated, really. It just means that a scientific claim should be testable. There should be a way to potentially disprove it.
So if someone claims a UFO sighting was aliens, how would we go about disproving that?
Well, we'd look for alternative explanations that fit the observed data. Could it have been a drone, a weather phenomenon, a reflection of light? Was the witness's perception reliable?
So we're looking for more plausible explanations that don't involve extraterrestrials.
Exactly. If we can find a more down-to-earth explanation that fits the facts, then the alien hypothesis becomes a lot less likely.
Makes sense. We're basically playing detective, right?
That's a good analogy. We're gathering clues, analyzing the evidence, trying to piece together a coherent story.
But sometimes the hardest part is knowing which clues to trust.
Right. And that's where critical thinking is so important.
So we can't just take everything at face value.
Nope. We have to evaluate the source of the information, consider the biases of those involved, be wary of sensationalized accounts.
Because sometimes people exaggerate or even make things up entirely, right?
It happens, unfortunately.
So even if a photo of a UFO looks really convincing, we need to be careful.
Absolutely. We need to ask, where did this photo come from? Who took it? Has it been altered in any way?
Right. And the same goes for eyewitness testimony.
Definitely. People's memories can be unreliable, especially when it comes to something as strange and unexpected as a UFO sighting.
I mean, think about it. You see something weird in the sky, it's dark, you're maybe a little scared.
Our brains can play tricks on us in those situations. We might see what we expect to see or remember things differently than they actually happened.
It's like those optical illusions that make you see things that aren't really there.
Exactly. Our perceptions are not always accurate, and that's something to keep in mind whenever we're dealing with UFO reports.
So it's not just about the evidence itself, but also about the context, the source, the potential for human error.
Right. We have to look at the big picture, consider all the factors at play.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've gone from wide-eyed wonder to a more grounded, skeptical approach.
And hopefully we've learned a thing or two along the way.
I know I have. But if there's one thing I want our listeners to take away from all this, it's this. Stay curious, but think critically.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Don't be afraid to question what you hear, even if it comes from someone you think is an expert.
And remember, the absence of a definitive explanation doesn't automatically mean something extraordinary is happening.
Sometimes the simplest answer is the best one, and sometimes the most honest answer is, we just don't know yet.
And that's okay. The search for truth is a journey, and it's the journey that matters, not just the destination.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of UFOs.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep looking up, but don't forget to bring your skeptical lenses with you.